What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Net Worth. I am your host, Justin Pugh. Today, we are jumping into Hard Knocks. I talk about the business of football. There is no better scenario than talking about Hard Knocks this year. This will go down as my second favorite Hard Knocks ever because it's all about the behind the scenes. It's all about the business of football. We're seeing how the GMs talk about players. We're seeing how the players talk about GMs. We're seeing how the money interacts. The first will always be the OG Hard Knocks, the first ever. That was a game changer. But this is the first time a team has ever let Hard Knocks inside the war room, looking at draft, looking at free agency. We've seen how negotiations happen, how blockbuster trades happen. So first, I want to give my thoughts on the Giants. And why would the Giants ever let Hard Knocks do that? It doesn't seem like a very Giants thing to do. I really think this all revolves around the Saquon dilemma. I think that was the first episode. That's what everyone wanted to tune in for. It probably got the highest ratings. I think the Giants realized that we probably need to get out in front of this. Last year, it was a saga that drug on, and it didn't resolve itself. And you see when Joe Schoen and Saquon talk about it, it clearly weighed on both of them last year. It was a bold move for the Giants to go out there and do this. I think they're like, hey, let's just put our cards out on the table. Let's show everyone what it's like to negotiate. We can kind of share our side of the story. Saquon will then get to share his side of the story, and it kind of puts it all out there. So hats off to the PR teams that got John Mara to sign off on it, because you saw in Hard Knocks how much this team means to John Mara. He will do anything for it. He eats, breathes, sleeps, lives Giants football. He comes into the facility every day and he's sitting in the cafeteria. He knows everybody's names. He knows everything that's going on. Something that I love about John Mara. And he was gracious enough to draft me and give me my start in football. Well, I got to tell Joe Schoen, take it easy on my guy. He's talking about heart palpitations when we're trying to deal up some quarterback dilemma. Just take it easy. We need to protect the general. So we're going to talk about a few people when we get into the show today. We're going to talk about, everyone that was instrumental in making it happen. I'm going to give a shout out to a few people that you might not have noticed and kind of their roles within the organization. First, we got to start out with Joe Schoen. This was Hard Knocks Joe Schoen. We saw background into his life, background into his family, how he makes his decisions, how much he loves peanut butter and jellies. I think he came across as a real dude. You saw his family, you saw his upbringing, you saw that he's put in the work to get to where he's at. People might not love some of his negotiation tactics. Me and Joe even got into it last year on my negotiation, but he has a set parameter in how he views this game, how he wants to build out that roster. And it was great to see him execute that on a high level, how he interacts with all the scouts, even to the point of giving feedback to his scouts at the very, very end of the episode, getting everyone together and having a family affair at the bar at the end. That was a great sign off. We got to see the human being Joe Schoen, which I think is huge for him. I also love his approach. It's with your shield or on it. He is going out swinging. He is going to make sure that he's either going to ride off into the glory and go win Super Bowls and be the GM of the next 20 years for the New York Giants, maybe 10 years. I don't know how long he wants to do it. But he took some big swing and some big misses, because everyone knows that ownership did not want Saquon Barkley going down the turnpike to the Philadelphia Eagles, and the worst case scenario happened. But Joe's comment of, I don't want to have a $40 million quarterback handing off to a $13 million running back, resonated with me. Clearly, the Giants want to throw the ball. They want their identity to play great defense on the defensive line. We talk about Brian Burns here in a minute. And then go out there and air the ball out. You have, last year's draft picks. You have Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, who I think is your clear number 2, Malik Neighbors, who we'll get into, they draft later on. You go out and get Theo Johnson, a tight end, and you go get Singletary, revamp the offensive line. Joe Schoen made that comment. They want to throw the ball. So clearly that's something that him and Coach Brian Daboll have talked about. Now, clearly when they mentioned a $13 million a year running back, they are talking about Saquon Barkley. The one thing that I want to mention and make very, very clear is Saquon Barkley was more than just a running back. He was everything for the New York Giants. That was illustrated very clearly by John Mara in this episode, or in this series. He was not happy that Saquon is going to Philadelphia. That is a career type decision for Joe Schoen. That and trading for Brian Burns are two very defining moves. You noticed how as soon as Saquon signed that deal, they pulled the trigger on the trade and got Brian Burns to come in. The Giants have always won their Super Bowls having the best defensive line in football, having guys like Michael Strahan, Justin Tuck, Osi Umenyiora, Matthias Kiwanuka. The list goes on and on. Jason Pierre-Paul. I love that they got back to what has made the New York Giants so successful. The one thing I don't love in that whole scenario is Saquon came out later on and said he didn't know he was being recorded. I don't know how all that went, but I did love that Saquon got to come out, not on Hard Knocks. It would have been kind of cool for Hard Knocks to go and interview Saquon as well. He did get to come out and have his own interview. He's happy. He's happy he's in Philadelphia. I think he should still be in New York, but at least he got paid, and that is all it's about. Here on this show, we recognize that players trade their health for money. No one sees that more than NFL running backs. So I am happy that Saquon went to Philadelphia and got his money. He's going to have a career year this year in Philadelphia with that offensive line. We know how I feel about Howie Roseman. I wish Howie Roseman wasn't such a good GM. He clearly saw that Saquon is more like a Christian McCaffrey and paid him accordingly. I just think the Giants and Saquon were jaded by the whole process. You saw how they were worn out by all the drama last year. I mean, it goes back to what I said earlier in the episode that I think the Giants probably did Hard Knocks to help alleviate the PR blowback of what was going to happen with Saquon Barkley and letting your biggest star in the biggest city in New York walk. And this goes back to supply and demand. Saquon is supplying skill on the field. The teams are demanding it. The Giants didn't see value past $12.5 million. Obviously, the Eagles did. And he went right down the street to Philadelphia, and he'll be playing in that Kelly Green that I hate to see. The Giants just didn't value the position. The way the team and the Giants structured their organization, they decided to go in a different direction. And we'll dive into more of how they're showing who they want to be throughout this episode. I do love that the Giants said, hey, go out there and see what your market is. They did give Saquon the ability to go test the market, and the market told us that there was demand for running backs in that range, and Saquon made the best decision for himself and his family. I wish he was in Big Blue. It's going to hurt me to see him in Eagles green, but I think both sides can win in this equation. The fan base loses. You lose out on a great player, but the team is going to go in a different direction. And that goes back to what I said about Joe Schoen. With your shielder on it, you feel very strongly for how to build a team. John Mara hired Joe Schoen to make those decisions for the football team, and he did that. And don't forget, guys, if things go great, Joe Schoen will get an extension. If things go poorly, he also could lose his job, just like a player. And people get lost in that because you just want to see wins and losses. But he's a real human. He has a real family. So it was good to see, both sides of that equation. Moving on to the next big topic, Daniel Jones and whether the Giants were going to draft a quarterback or not. I think that was handled well. Daniel knew going into this offseason there were going to be question marks when you have an injury like that. And, we didn't have the season that we were going to have last year. You knew they were going to talk about quarterbacks. I love the fact that DJ has the opportunity now to go out there and prove all the haters wrong. Look, I just watched the last preseason game. It's a continuing improvement. He put in all the work to get his knee right. He's going to have a chance to silence everybody. If he goes out and plays great, the Giants are in unbelievable shape. They have a quarterback under contract for $40 million a year. If he goes out and plays poorly, the Giants then will have to address that position going forward. That's the NFL. Just like I said about Joe Schoen, if you don't do your job, you won't have a job. And I'm glad the Giants didn't give up the future to go out and trade for one of these quarterbacks, because the odds of hitting on it, Dayball pulls it up on his phone, is slim to none that you're going to hit one of these quarterbacks in the first round. I will say, though, the rookie quarterbacks have looked good in their first preseason game, but it is just preseason. Let's not get too high. Let's not get too low. But I will get high for a minute, not that kind, high on the offensive line. I do like how Hard Knocks talked about almost like poker and how much you want to pay a player. And we saw that with John Runyon Jr. and Jermaine Illuminor coming in free agency. Now, I know this isn't Hard Knocks related, but I'm just going to give my thoughts on the O-line real quick because I know the position well. I know the guys in the room. Andrew Thomas, stud, all-pro, stud left tackle, lock him in. Runyon now is starting at left guard. He's a little banged up at the moment, but he will be back and he will be one of the best pass protectors. And what do we say the identity of the Giants is going to be? Probably throwing the ball and airing it out a little bit more. John Michael Schmidt comes in. I think he becomes the leader of this offensive line. He's coming into his own. He was great last year as a rookie. I've been around a lot of rookie offensive linemen. He has a bright future. Then we have JVR, Greg Van Roten, late veteran addition signing in training camp. He had been there with Carm Brasillo in Las Vegas last year, started every game. They needed that veteran. That's what I was last year, and I'm glad that if it wasn't me, it was Greg. He's a great player. He's a great human being. He's a local guy, Long Island. He slots right in and starts at right guard. He put a lot of great film on there. And this is where it gets interesting. Jermaine Illuminor, was at left guard during OTAs. Now he's at right tackle, playing next to Greg Van Roten, who he had played next to last year. We basically get a returning right side for the first time in the last few years for the New York Giants. Jermaine has shown that he has been a quality right tackle in this league, and he can do it week in and week out against the highest level. He's back where he should be playing. Now, the last question everyone's going to ask is Evan Neal. I love this for Evan Neal. It takes the pressure off of Evan Neal. Every day he walks in that door, it's not, hey, Evan, are you going to go out there and play today? Hey, Evan, are you healthy? Hey, Evan, are you this? Are you that? It's like, hey, Evan, get right. And when you are right, go out there and be on the second team for right now. You're going to get to go against Brian Burns. You're going to get to go against Kayvon Thibodeau. And that depth is everything that the New York Giants need. Evan Neal will play football for the New York Giants this year. He will be helpful, whether that's winning the starting right tackle spot back, whether that's filling in for someone that gets injured, whether that's helping the defense and get those guys right. Because Evan Neal is a massive human being. He is right. He was put on earth to play offensive line in the NFL. And I'm excited to see his growth. Speaking of one of those guys he will go against, let's hop into Brian Burns in the defensive line. That trade was very fascinating for me to see how that progressed from Senior Bowl to the draft and then kind of through the season. And when free agency kicked off, Dan Morgan and Joe Schoen were able to make a deal happen. It just goes to show you do business with people you like. So whether that's football or life in general, it is a great piece of advice. When you treat people right, I think their families go on vacation and things of that nature. But when you treat people right, good things tend to happen. And that trade is a blockbuster for the New York Giants. Brian Burns, one of the best pass rushers. I've been talking about getting another pass rusher in there. You never can have too much. My philosophy is you should have 8 starting defensive linemen. Now, we'll get into my philosophy down the road on how I would build out a team. I'm not a GM right now, obviously, but with Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, there's some rookies that are coming along. Nacho in there. The defensive line is one of the best in the NFL. The Giants will rely on that defensive line throughout the entire season. You have Bobby Okereke in the middle, getting those guys rolling. I think it's the best defensive line in football. One of the best defensive lines. It's probably the Jets or the Giants in San Francisco that are going to be in the running. I love that signing for the New York Giants. There's so much pressure to play in New York. Defensive line is one of the easier positions to play. All you got to do is get after the quarterback, and those guys have sky-high confidence. I'm sure I'll catch some slack from some of the D linemen out there, but you just get 1 sack a game, you're a Hall of Famer. You win 1 time a game. Come on. It ain't that hard. All right, moving on to some additional staff notes. Some people that shined in this series that I think we'll talk more about in later years and just names to keep an eye on. Brandon Brown, the assistant GM for the New York Giants. He will be a GM in the future. He talked about his wide receivers and defensive backs, wanting them to be dogs. And I don't know if everyone remembers Deion Sanders talking about this later, last year. He's like, he wanted his quarterbacks to have parents coming from both homes, and he wanted some other positions not to have both their parents and come from single mother families. It's crazy that is how players are talked about in football, and it's part of the business of it. Not to say Brandon feels that way. I'm just saying, like, you want to have those dogs in the huddle, and it's the slogan now is dogs, and they went out and got a dog in the draft. But Brandon Brown will be a GM in the NFL. Mark my words on this. And another name that's in there that maybe not as many people know about, but if you're a Giants fan, you definitely do, is Tim McDonald. Probably one of my favorite quotes of Hard Knocks was, "What's our identity? Who would be if we let Saquon Barkley walk out of the door?" We've seen through the draft and keeping Daniel Jones, we're changing the identity of the New York Giants as we speak, and that will be established this year. I think it's more of a pass-heavy team. But we will see. What is our identity? Tim McDonald is one of the, one of the Maras, part of the ownership group. His family is part of the ownership group. I think he is the man that will take on the torch of running the team one day when John Mara decides to step down. So just a name to keep an eye on. Tim does an unbelievable job in the scouting department. He's very well respected, very well known. But just wanted to throw that in there. I think we'll probably see him running the New York Giants and making decisions about trading up and trading back one day. And it's something that he's just a great, great human being. Speaking of drafts, speaking of that process, let's talk about how the Giants break down teams. They have a very unique quarterback process led by Brian Daboll. Shows you where they're going heading into the season. They were thinking about trading up and trying to get one of these quarterbacks. I love that Daboll asks different questions, because if you come to New York and play quarterback, it's unlike anywhere else on planet Earth. You can't just show up and play. You have to be able to handle everything that goes with it. And that's something that we saw him ask. We saw him firing questions at the draftees and really getting hands-on and assessing that process. And it was unique to see. Not everybody handles it that way, and Daboll's been around some of the best quarterbacks in the game, so he knows exactly what he's looking for. If I was out there trying to find a quarterback, Brian Daboll is the man to hire for the job. And also, get you a GM that looks at you the way Joe Schoen does. Every time he drafted one of the guys or a draft pick walked in the door, he lit up, probably because he gets them, contract under control for 5 years. He mentioned that. But the Giants didn't make a quarterback decision. They didn't draft a quarterback. They didn't address the position at all. They did bring in Drew Lock. Apologize. They did bring in Drew Lock. You have Tommy DeVito there as well from last year, and that's who they are rolling with. But it was great to see that process and how much goes into it and how unique it is when you have to potentially draft a quarterback in New York City. Speaking of New York City and drafting someone to New York City, they brought in the biggest dog of the draft, Malik Neighbors. They wanted him all along. He fell to them at 6. He's the perfect guy. You talk about him, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze. Like, those 3 guys are going to be compared for the rest of their careers. Malik has all the makings to be the best. Shane references how APY and how much money the receivers have skyrocketed. Receivers are making $35 million a year. I talked about trading for Brandon Ayuk and giving him $28 million. Now he's probably going to get closer to $35 million. So to get a guy like Malik Neighbors that you'll have under contract control for the next 5 years is huge, especially in positions like receiver, quarterback, defensive end. It's really going to be key to hit on those guys in the draft, because you can't just go get them in free agency. A, they cost so much, and B, those guys probably aren't getting to the market. Some additional draft thoughts that I had, how involved John Mara is. I'm going to mention that again. There's not many owners that are interested in who the second and third round picks are. But John Mara walks into his room and he wants to know, hey, why are we drafting this guy over that? Not every day you get an owner like that. That's why the Giants have had the long success. The Mara family, the Tisch family are very, very involved. You see them sitting in the war room, in the draft room, getting ready to do that. I also love how Joe Schoen brought in the defensive coordinator and said, hey, how do we like the second round pick in Nubin? Or how do we like Drew Phillips, the defensive back that they drafted? Does he fit our scheme? So many times you would think GMs and the coaches are going back and forth, but sometimes that falls through the cracks. Sometimes the GM falls in love with somebody, but that guy doesn't fit the scheme. So I love that they are working with Shane Bowen, the defensive coaches, the defensive back coaches were in there while they drafted those guys. All in all, I thought this was one of the best hard knocks I've ever witnessed. Really peel back the curtain on what the business of football looks like. I'm excited next time, maybe they could do this, is almost do a hard knocks behind the scenes free agency from a player perspective to see how the players go through it all. We got to see draft boards. We got to see how guys are ranked. Raise a ton of questions out there as well. This, for me, was the perfect way to kick off the offseason, to get through the mundane, because it's really hard to get excited to watch the draft, or maybe not the draft, but like the combine and all these workouts and all these all-star games. This was the perfect way to get a glimpse behind the scenes. I hope more teams are willing to open up like the New York Giants. Of course, the Giants. We're leading from the front. We're showing how it's done and how to manage. I'm excited to see. I would love to get more into the cap side of things. hopefully in the next one, maybe if you go to the Cleveland Browns or the Eagles or the Minnesota Vikings, we could see how teams talk about their cap strategy and how they do that. I've been very interested in that as well. All in all, A+ Hard Knocks. We love what you guys did over there, NFL Network. I really appreciated watching this. Fans, what do you think? What am I missing? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Am I crazy on some of my takes? We will keep this thing rolling. Net Worth is rolling. We're back in the season. I took a gig with ESPN, Underdog Fantasy. I'm doing some Sirius XM radio. I will not forget about my fans here at Net Worth. You guys have been holding it down. We're going to talk about a lot more things coming forward. We're going to have an NFC East preview that I want to get some local fans involved in. So Giants fans, who should I have on to break down the Giants odds in the NFC East this year? Eagles fans, I'm going to have to find an Eagles fan. Maybe I'll have one of my closest friends on. Dallas, I think I'm going to do a GM for a day on Dallas, not just GM for a day. He's got to be owner for a day because Jerry Jones calls all the shots. And then we'll talk about the Commanders. My former coach, Cliff Kingsbury, down there. Jaden Daniels looked good in preseason 1. So stay tuned, Net Worth. There's a lot more coming up, and I'm excited for my future in this thing. It all started here on Net Worth. Thank you. Like, subscribe, do all this stuff you guys know how to do. And I will see you guys on the next episode.